G'day cadets, and welcome to your guide for drill misconceptions. Being our first video, we'd like to welcome you to the series as we drag you into the abyss of Chapter 2, Calling Commands in 60-33. By now you should be familiar with a normal command, a two-part command. Those two parts are called the preparatory command and the command of execution. The preparatory command tells you what the movement will be, and the executionary command means do it now. There is an exception to the preparatory command that doesn't tell you what it's going to be. And this is specifically used when calling your unit to attention or calling them to halt. And that preparatory command is going to be the unit designation. So for example, flight, tench hut, or squadron halt. Those are the only two examples where you put flight and squadron in front of a command. All other preparatory commands are going to be more specific, telling you what you need to do. For example, left face, right step, harch, to the rear, harch. Those are all very specific preparatory commands telling you what you need to do, and upon the command of execution, you do it. Before we move on to the next type of command, heed this warning. Refrain from the urge to double up on the preparatory command. For example, do not say flight, parade, rest. Why? Because flight does nothing for you in that example. It's just adding another preparatory command that does nothing. However, in Chapter 2, Section 3.7, it does mention that you are allowed to give a letter designation. So for example, if you are in an area where there are a lot of flights, you're able to say Charlie flight, forward, harch. Charlie flight gives you a specific designation so that there's not going to be that confusion when you have other flights around. Then you have the preparatory command, which is forward, and then the executionary command, which is harch. In the event you improperly call a preparatory command, such as saying left when you mean right, you can use the command as you were. This revokes the preparatory command, but there is this misconception that it revokes the command altogether. This is incorrect. If you call left flank when you mean right flank, it's too late to use as you were. Your flight should automatically just continue doing the left flank, and as the drill instructor, it's your job to get the flight back onto the right track. So obviously the correction for this would be doing to the rear. Our next type of command is a combined command. This combines the preparatory command and command of execution into one. Example of this would be fall in, fall out, at ease, and rest. Do not say squadron fall in, flight at ease, flight at rest. Those are improperly called commands because there is no preparatory command or command of execution. Our next type of command is a supplementary command. There are going to be three examples of when supplementary commands are used, but they're always going to be given by a subordinate leader. The first example is when a unit needs to do a movement that's different from other units. The second example is when the same movement needs to be executed but at a different time. And lastly, just to echo the preparatory command. Believe it or not, your first exposure to supplementary commands was likely not at encampment. Rather, it's probably at your local squadron. Let's say you're your flight sergeant calling the command call my files from the right. That's my preparatory command, but as the first element leader, yours would be stand fast. Once everyone was marching, you would then call forward harch. Let's bring it back to encampment. Let's say you're practicing pass and review. Your squadron commander calls calm left. As the first flight commander, you would also repeat that preparatory command, calm left. The other flight commanders would instead say continue the march. Once the squadron commander calls the command of execution, the command is executed by the first flight. But once the other flights approach, they will then call the correct movement when they get to the correct location as that flight in front of them. Our last example of a supplementary command is basic echoing. Think back to the regular two-part command. The only exception is that now you have a squadron commander and a flight commander. You may be familiar with squadron flight. Remember, this type of preparatory command can only be used with attention and halt. So for example, squadron flight tench hut, or squadron flight halt. Then all other preparatory commands are repeated just the same as they are called. So for example, present arms. In that example, the squadron commander called present, the flight commanders repeated present, and the squadron commander called arms. Then the command was executed. Another example would be parade, rest. The squadron commander called parade, the flight commander called parade, the squadron commander called rest, and the command was executed. The last type of command we'll cover in this module is informational commands. This has no preparatory command and no command of execution. Rather, it's simply a senior telling a junior what they need to do. So for example, if you have an inspecting officer coming up, they may say, prepare for inspection to that flight commander. Another example would be a squadron commander telling the first sergeant to dismiss the squadron. These are simple informational commands giving a specific direction to a junior commander. As we wrap up this video, we have some tips and tricks for you to make you professional at drill. Our first tip for you is that almost all commands are going to be called facing your flight and mirroring their actions. The only exception is if you are part of a larger unit. For example, let's say you're a flight commander and currently in a squadron formation. Instead of facing your flight, you're going to be facing your squadron commander and instead calling your commands over your right shoulder. The next tip for you is not to drag out preparatory commands. Many people call this command as such: count, cadence, count. This is improper because you're dragging that preparatory command out into 2 steps. Imagine if you did that to right flank harch. That is also incorrect because you're dragging out the preparatory command into 2 steps once again. These commands should be called in 1 step. For example, count cadence, count, and right flank, harch, putting the point of emphasis on the last word, which would be flank or cadence. And with that, we're all done here with our first lesson. Thank you for joining the training and see you later.